Welcome back. This is English 245. I am Professor Pichel, and this is my second lecture on the Iliad. This lecture is on Book 22, The Death of Hector. My lecture's title is Desolation Before Troy. I'm just going to do a little scene setting. We've skipped a lot, and we're focusing on this book because it is a significant moment in Western literature. The death of Hector has broad repercussions. It will lead to much more literature and much more ink being spilled on paper. But let's get to where we are. If you remember from the first lecture, Achilles refused to fight after Agamemnon took Briseis from him in exchange for Chryseis, who he had to return to Apollo's temple, and to the priest Chryses, her father. So since then, Achilles has not fought, but his very close companion, Patroclus, has donned his armor, gone out onto the battlefield. In a very heated battle, he encounters Hector on the battlefield. Hector believes that this is Achilles and that this is his chance to kill him. The Greek army is weakened because Apollo is helping the Trojans at this point. And also, Achilles is not fighting, even though Hector thinks Achilles is fighting. So Patroclus in Achilles' armor is killed by Hector on the battlefield. And Hector strips him, takes the armor at much loss in battle, and now he wears Achilles' old armor, I guess we could say. So after that, Achilles decides to rejoin the battle. He decides to take some tribute, some treasure from Agamemnon, and to make amends. And he goes on the warpath. And when Achilles goes on the warpath, nothing can stand in his way. In fact, Hector is the only Trojan who could dare try to match him. The Trojans are driven back into the walled city of Troy, where they're safe. They close the gates. But Hector stays outside for a multitude of reasons. He feels some guilt about making some bad battlefield decisions. When they had the advantage, he held back a little bit, and he thinks that he is going to be berated by his warrior companions, by some of the other chief captains of the Trojan army. So he decides to stay outside and face Achilles in hand-to-hand combat, single hand-to-hand combat. Now, I want to talk about my focus for this lecture. This is a violent confrontation that is clearly leveled by the gods in favor of Achilles, but there is also an emergence, a salient emergence of Greek thought in this chapter, and appeals to reason, what the Greeks would call logos, right? Which can mean many things. It can mean word, but it can also mean reason, and appeals to reason and to logic, I guess we would say, which is where the term logic comes from logos. So right in the middle of the conflict, this happens. So Apollo has been helping the Trojans before Book 22 begins. He has just tricked Achilles and spirited away a Trojan warrior that Achilles was trying to kill. That was Agenor, which really angers Achilles. He calls Apollo the most malevolent of the gods, right? And the god now turns his attention to Hector. Apollo turns his attention to Hector. He's going to help Hector in his fight against Achilles. Okay. And Apollo enables Hector with certain abilities, particularly the ability to run, interestingly enough, right? And Apollo is sort of the father of logos in many ways in Greek thought. We know he convenes the first court in Aeschylus's play, the Eumenides. So yeah, Apollo is on the side of Hector, at least for now. Hector first awaits his rival outside of Troy's walls, preparing for battle. He feels bound by duty and pressure from other Trojan warriors who he feels he has somehow failed with some bad decisions, and he feels like he's got to sort of show that he can still get the job done, and he's going to do this by facing Achilles alone, which is really not that smart because Achilles is part God. He's got a little bit of God in him. We could say that he's almost sort of like a demigod. He's sort of like Heracles, another Greek character who has abilities very similar to Achilles, right? So above on the ramparts, Hector's parents are watching. His father and mother. His father is Priam. His mother is Hecubus. They're the king and queen of Troy. And they are up on the walls pleading with their son to come inside and don't fight Achilles because they're pretty sure he's going to die, that Hector is going to die in this conflict with Achilles. There's some real sad language in both Priam and Hecuba's pleading to their son, Hector. In fact, Hecuba even brings out her breast and says, if ever I comforted you with this breast when you were little, please come up here. I want my son to live, right? So it gets very dramatic. Priam is talking about, he's gonna if Hector dies, he's gonna die soon. Troy's gonna fall. His body's gonna be eaten by dogs, as an old man. All this kind of stuff, real bad stuff, right? But Hector does not relent. Hector stays to face Achilles. Now, this is really interesting, and this is what I want to emphasize here. Uh, Around lines 110 to 120, Hector has this idea suddenly as Achilles is approaching, and this is very important. He has this idea like maybe I should try reasoning with him, right? Now, if you know anything about Achilles, and especially Achilles in his wrathful state, which he is in full swing now, there is no reasoning with him. But it's significant that Hector wants to try to reason with him. In the middle of this violent, brutal war, graphic killings, graphic descriptions of blood gushing out, of eyes going dark, windpipes being severed, guts being spilled, all these things. Suddenly, somebody decides, maybe I should think about this. And that somebody is Hector. And I'm going to read to you what Hector says. He says, "But what if I put aside my studded shield and my strong helmet, leaned my spear against the walls, and going out alone approached noble Achilles and pledged to him Helen and the possessions with her, all those things, as much as Alexandros carried away to Troy in his hollow ships, which was the beginning of our quarrel, to give to the sons of Atreus to lead away, in addition to divide everything else with the Achaeans, whatever this city holds, and after that to make a formal oath with the Trojan council not to hide anything, but divide it all equally." This is very striking notation in all of this violence and war. Suddenly we have the lead Trojan warrior saying, maybe we should talk about this. Maybe we should try to make a deal. Maybe I should just say, hey, take Helen back. We'll give you treasure. We'll give you half the treasure of Troy. We'll do just about anything you want. Please don't sack our city and destroy our people and kill our men and take our women as slaves and kill our children, because they know this is what the Greeks will do if and when they do take Troy. He quickly talks himself out of it. So there's this moment of thought, like maybe I can reason with him. But his next thought is, but why does my heart debate these things? I could set forth to meet him, and he not pity me, nor even respect me, but kill me naked as I was, as if I were a woman. Since I would have put off my armor, it is not now possible from rock or oak in the country way to chatter to him. those things that a girl and youth chattered to each other. A girl and youth, no, it is better to engage him straight away. We shall see to whom the Olympians give glory. Now, he has this wonderful breakthrough in thought, and now he's sort of saying, this is something that a woman or a girl would do. He's not going to respect that. And then I'll take off my armor and put my weapons down, and he'll just kill me. I think it's really interesting that Hector characterizes this as female behavior. Often in the classical world, wisdom or Sophia was characterized as a woman. So there's one for the female gender, right? Perhaps our wisdom and reasoning comes largely from them and their kind of thought. Anyway, after this, he decides to face what's going on, right? Um, it's one of these true instances of Greek thought of appealing to reason rather than resorting to violence, the gods, or bloodshed, and it occurs at the peak of the Iliad's martial conflict. So think about that. Typically, a Greek warrior would just sort of resort to violence, martial skill with weapons and strategy, have somebody killed, right? Or appeal to the gods. And Hector doesn't do any of this when he's thinking about reasoning with Achilles. This is a great breakthrough in Western thought, right? This is very humanistic. It's kind of like maybe we can deal with them. Of course, it doesn't work out. After going through this thought pattern and dismissing it, Hector strangely decides to flee Achilles by running around the walls of Troy. And he is given superhuman speed by Apollo. Here's another thing. Though this may appear to be a cowardly act for such a great and heroic warrior, it also follows the pattern of emerging thought in Greek literature. Hector seems to inherently know that he can't defeat Achilles in single combat. So think about what he's done so far. He does two things that make more sense than fighting. First of all, he thinks about using reason and rhetoric, right? The art of persuasion. He thinks about it, but he doesn't do it. And then he just decides, run away, right? If I can't fight this guy and I can't reason with him, I'm going to run, okay? Of course, the gods are not going to allow this, but this is significantly different behavior from just about any other warrior involved until this point in the Iliad. Well, what happens is Hector does run with Apollo giving him superhuman speed. We already know that Achilles has superhuman speed, and he's chasing him. They run around the entire city of Troy 3 times. So this is a big race, right? And we get all kinds of metaphors like wolves coming down on deers, fawns in the mountains, and those kinds of things. And obviously, Achilles is the wolf, and Hector is that fawn running from him, right? Meanwhile, back to the immortals. So what's going on up there on Olympus? Gods are talking about this. It's almost like what the humans are doing is kind of like the gods' TV or something. So Apollo is helping Hector, and just about all the other gods, particularly Hera and Athena, are on the side of Achilles. Right? So Athena starts working on Zeus. What are you going to do? You going to let Hector actually fight and Apollo help him? And he's immortal. Just let him die. Achilles has god blood in him, right? What are you doing, Zeus? Just it seems destiny that Hector has to die. So why play these games, right? And Zeus says, okay, and he gets out scales. He actually gets out these scales, right? And Hector's on one, and Achilles is on the other one. And Achilles' scale goes up, and Hector's scale goes down. And right around this time on the battlefield, Athena teleports to the battlefield. She takes the guise of Deiphobos, who is another one of the great Greek Trojan warriors, excuse me. So Deiphobos, and he's also one of Hector's brothers. So imagine this. You're alone on this battlefield facing the toughest guy you've ever faced, toughest opponent you've ever faced. You know you're doomed. And suddenly a good, trusted fellow warrior appears, one of your comrades, and says, "Hey, man, we can take him. Quit running. I'm here with you." Right. And so Hector's sort of like, "Whoa, I thought you were inside the city." And Hector stops and turns um, to face Achilles. Right. And because of Zeus's decision against Hector, Apollo splits on him right there. So Apollo completely abandons Hector, and suddenly he's sort of like, "Whoa, my superhuman speed is gone. What happened? I don't feel Apollo anymore." Right? And then he quickly realizes he has no support from Apollo, and that Deiphobos is actually Athena, and that he has been tricked. But it gets worse. Okay, so the actual fight between these Greek and Trojan heroes occurs in lines 250 to lines 365. But Hector doesn't really stand a chance. Notably, and in keeping with his emerging logos, as they start fighting, Hector sort of appeals to Achilles and tries to reason with him again and says, "Hey, all right, we're going to fight to the death. I know that, but let's agree that we will have honorable treatment of who's ever dies. Their body will go back to their people. They'll get funeral rites, all those sorts of things." Right? Achilles violently rejects Hector's proposals, and with his godlike strength and the help of Athena, he kills Hector. This is the lines 326 to 363. And the entire time this fight is going on, there's sort of this banter back and forth. It almost reminds me of superheroes in comic books and supervillains. You know, I always thought it was kind of ridiculous. They're having these intense fights and they're chiding each other and exchanging sort of insults and those sorts of things. You could imagine two great athletes competing and sort of insulting each other and refusing to make any concessions. And that's exactly what's going on here. So let's see. I want to emphasize a couple of things. Hector is a mortal man, right? He's fighting for his home and his family against the Greeks and the gods to a lot of extent. But he appears to never have had a chance in this match. Uh, in many ways, his achievements defending Troy up until his death are much more impressive than the feats of Achilles and the Greeks. And I want to emphasize this. Um, Hector is a great warrior, he's a great leader, but ultimately, he is totally human, right? So he can suffer loss in ways that even Achilles can't suffer loss. We know that Achilles will eventually die, but Hector has a family, he has a wife, he has an infant son. Okay? He is sort of like, in some ways, he's a very American character. He's kind of like a regular guy in this world of gods and demigods and titans, and he strives with those forces, even though he is eventually killed by them. Right? In many ways, Hector represents the ideal mortal, alone against the universe and fighting against all odds, using his reason and his body to maximum effect. Okay. Um, the section ends with the laments of Hector's parents. So we get speeches from Priam and speeches from Hecuba lamenting the death of their son. And I want to emphasize this also, that the after this intense battle, where and I also want to mention that during the fight, Hector actually gets off a pretty good spear shot at Achilles, but he and Achilles gets a spear shot off at him and misses him, and Athena is helping Achilles. In addition to all of Achilles' godlike power, his wrath, his strength, his fighting prowess, his speed, he's got a goddess helping him. Hector is completely alone. He's immortal. No god's helping him anymore, and he is facing his end. Right. Um, so We also get to see, very sadly, Andromache. This is Hector's wife. She is weaving a garment for Hector and getting a hot bath ready for him in their apartments inside Troy when she hears people wailing and crying and keening, which is a sound is still in many cultures. I know in Africa and in Ireland uh, and other cultures around the world, typically women keen uh, for deaths, and it's a high pitched kind of nasal. I know it sounds strange to us, but it is a what seems to be a worldwide custom, or at least prevalent in a lot of cultures, and still around today. So she hears this. Um, she she passes out basically, and then we get some sentiments about their son, who is just barely a toddler. He's an infant, pretty much. His name is Astyanax, and how he is going to be an orphan now. And without a father in these types of societies, he is not going to have a place at the table, even though he is the father of a prince, right? I mean, the son of a prince. He is not going to have the kind of privileges and the kind of protection that he would have if Hector were still alive. So I think it's very interesting that this chapter, The Death of Hector, does not focus so much on Achilles in the aftermath. In fact, when Achilles and finally kills Hector, and they talk till the end, Hector's got his windpipe is still working, even though Achilles' spear went in right close to it, and he can still talk, and they talk to the very end. Um, Then the other Greek warriors come up who were formerly terrified of Hector. And what do? They start hacking at him and stabbing him and kind of taking hits at the corpse and saying, "You're not so tough now, big guy," right? Showing that Hector was much better than them. And in fact, many of them comment on his physique and his handsomeness. And even in death, he seems to have some charisma and fear invoking qualities. So we get this sharp focus in this intense battle chapter. We get a sharp focus on Hector's reason, on his willingness to not fight for another option, right? Either trying to bargain or run away, right? Eventually, he just gets trapped into this fight by the gods, and we know that he's bound to lose. And also, the text's emphasis on Hector's family following his death. He has somebody. He has a city. He has a family. He is not the invader here, right? So it's very interesting. The entire section seems to undermine the Greeks as heroes and draw attention to the good human qualities found in the Trojans, which are exemplified by Hector. The section also reinforces the idea that the gods are completely fickle and cannot be relied upon by mortals, by any mortals. They change their minds. They support somebody like Apollo supporting Achilles, or Apollo supporting Hector, excuse me, and Zeus supporting Hector. And then the two of them withdrawing their support like that at the worst possible time. So all Hector has to rely on is himself, his wits, his strength, his intelligence, and against the gods, those things don't always work out. I also want to point out a couple of things about sort of Greek moral views of the world. Uh, I want you to note that Greek notions of good and evil are very different than our ideas of the same concepts. The gods exhibit what we would consider to be both good and evil behavior, and their worship seems to be only the expression of piety for mortals. So, so what I mean by that is the only way that, say, a Greek is supposed to show piety in what you could call Greek religion is just worshiping the gods and giving them sacrifices and those sorts of things. It doesn't really entail a moral code, a strict moral code. Even though there are some things like we know that there are wives, we know that there are funeral rites, those types of things. But what we would think of as evil or as good uh, is very different from what the Greeks would think. So think about this, for instance. Achilles is typically proposed as the hero and protagonist of the Iliad, right? And he characterizes Hector as evil on line 380. And Hector characterizes Achilles as evil on line 288, right? And if you recall, Achilles even calls Apollo the most malevolent of the gods, right? Saying, like, you're the most evil of the gods, man. So it's not as clear as, say, there's a God who's all good, there's a devil who's all bad. It's not like that at all, right? All the gods exhibit what we would consider good and evil behavior. And mortals, sadly enough, are trapped in that world with them. So the Greek gods are without our versions of morals, and ancient Greek ideas of good and evil differ greatly from our own. But what do we get out of all of this? The struggling human that we find in Hector. We could think of him as a representative of every human struggling against a universe that they can't always control, no matter how good we are, no matter how much we try, no matter how many people we have supporting us. Oftentimes, we are all alone against the vast forces of the universe, whether you want to call it the elements, physics, chemistry, the gods, God, fate, all of those things. Also, I just wanted to kind of point out that wisdom is loosely associated with a female aspect, and later it will be closely associated with a female aspect in the form of Sophia. You want to remember the term logos, right, which is that Greek ideal of reason. And that raises its head here very prominently. You could almost miss it if you get caught up in all the fighting and those sorts of things, but raises its head here very prominently in Book 22 of the Iliad. Thank you.